I'd like to talk about. Let me first of all introduce the people who are here. On my right is
Miriam Ward.
Miriam Ward. She's a professor of religious studies at St. Michael's. And on my left is Carol Fourniba Gunter. She is in charge of UVM's Continuing Education Center. So we're glad to have you both.
Thank you.
There's a lot
Glad
for
to
us
be
to
here.
talk about today. I will just give a brief kind of introduction, and then maybe since you're on my right and I'm right-handed, I'll ask you to lead off, and then Carol, if you would, follow up. The subject today is, do we see in the secular culture a yearning for God? And I'm using God in a very broad sense. I'm not just talking about anything in terms of necessarily Buddhism or Christianity or Roman Catholicism or anything else. I'm just saying in a broad sense, do we see people in our secular culture outside of the regular environment of churches, temples, and synagogues? Do we see people reaching out, yearning for God, however they might define that? And that's what we're investigating, talking about today. So I will just ask Miriam if you would lead off here.
Yes, Father Lee, and I'm glad you mentioned that it's not a specifically or overtly religious context by secular. That's what I'm understanding in the question. So can the quest for God be recognized in secular society? And I say yes. And I base it on the premise that I think every human being innately strives or has a tendency towards transcendence, something outside of oneself, sort of a pushing towards absolutes. And I find it's sort of a pervasive human conviction, and despite all appearances to the contrary, all human life does rest on some ultimate universal ground, and that people really are seeking after something that's coherent, even though so much in life seems absurd and lacking in coherence and fragmented and so on. Now, whether they call that God or not, I believe that they're seeking a higher being. Now, along with that idea, my premise is the sort of a corollary, which I would say that people ultimately are searching for truth. For me, the ultimate truth is God. And they want an integrative principle in their life, an integrative foundation, something that gives meaning to the things that we do, that something that helps us to do moral actions, to be moral, to strive to be moral in our actions. In fact, something that gives meaning to why we get up in the morning. And now I'm not saying here, I don't see the quest for meaning and the quest for God as identical.
No.
But I see them as related. Now, I'd like to say more on that, but perhaps our other guest might add something. I'd like to talk a little bit more, but maybe one example I could give that comes to mind immediately is I just read recently about the sale of the records of the monks of Santo Domingo de Silos in Spain. The sale of this record of Gregorian chant, which is a medieval church compositions, has gone way beyond all other sales of rather sacred music. And at first sight, this sounds rather strange. When you think about it, and you think about the Gregorian chant, which I was brought up on.
Sure.
It's a monophonic, very, very beautiful in its utter simplicity. And I think what people are seeking there, particularly those of us in a materialistic society that we live in, they're looking for that that simplicity. And the utter simplicity to me is God, the ultimate simplicity.
Now, you're right with you, Carol. Your statements, Sister Miriam, I take are as objective as you can be. In other words, you're not looking at society only, if you can separate yourself, only through the eyes of a devout Roman Catholic who is also a member of a religious community. Mm-hmm. You're trying to, and hoping that maybe people will get religious.
Oh, well, there are other examples that have perhaps on the surface would seem to have nothing to do with religion. Mm-hmm. That particular example did, and the other one I was going to mention because the music comes from the 12th century is Hildegard of Bingen. Her music is now enjoying tremendous popularity, and her own compositions. And so those happen to be
objective facts.
Objective facts, which have a real spiritual connotation. But to me, what it suggests, both of those suggest a striving for a spirituality that goes way beyond ourselves. Mm-hmm. But there are other examples that I can give where I think that it will apply, as I think Michael Novak, who is a very conservative Roman Catholic, he would argue that almost any human self-expression betrays some kind of religious significance. Mm-hmm. Now, I could give some other examples, but perhaps I should give somebody else an opportunity to speak.
Okay, Carol?
Well, thank you. I really am appreciating your insights, and ever since you've asked me to come today, I've been thinking a lot about this question. And really what I feel is that daily life is where God is to be found, that what we find in other people and in our experience of life is the way that God is manifested in the world. So I don't really view it as separate from that. There's the transcendental expression of the divine, and then there's the immanent expression of the divine, and that immanent expression really comes through all of the people that we interact with, all of the things that we experience in life. So my sense right now of what's going on in the world is that there's a very deep calling for a new definition of holiness, a new definition of sacredness. I think that's an element that Teilhard de Chardin, the great Christian scientist and mystic, spoke of. And that the searching that's going on for people right now in different ways is a search to redefine that sacredness and that holiness and to bring it into every aspect of daily life. And I think it's a wonderful quest and a wonderful journey that we're all on. So I guess I'm viewing how the search for the divine is manifested in life as an ongoing journey, that it's something that we discover internally and we discover externally in every aspect of our lives, and that gradually as it becomes manifested in individuals, then it becomes more present in the world around us.
Are there some objective elements, some objective data you could share with us, as Sister has? I mean, you have given us your interpretation, which is interesting, but do you see something that would, by its presence, call attention to itself?
Well, I think what comes to mind are some recent articles that I've read in various popular magazines in Time Life, the power of healing in prayer, and the popularity of speakers such as Deepak Chopra, who has quite an enormous following of individuals across many countries who are very much interested in their own spirituality and various aspects of healing and how to make that present in the world. There are others right now, another isn't coming to mind. One thing that I think can be seen in both the media and in individuals' public presentations, I think of Hillary Clinton and often her references to spirituality and the orientation that she has. And I think of specifically some of the popular songs that are maybe rap songs or they may be rock songs, but there's a lot of drawing on some of the terminology and the orientation that has its roots in various religious traditions as examples of different ways that spirituality is being manifested in our culture as the needs of the culture are changing.
My wife pointed out to me this morning that in Newsweek they have a large feature article on prayer, and that God is featured on TV Guide.
And and the last cover of Time magazine has the I believe it says, "Does heaven exist?" or "Where is heaven?" I haven't had time to read it, but
Oh, I haven't read it.
but that's the
either.
last issue of Time magazine.
But I am curious. Well, I can look into it. I don't think that any of the religious large bodies have put these people up to these articles. I think they.
No, I
think it comes out of their own experience.
And if they want to sell magazines, they're going to put in articles that are going to sell.
That's right.
They have to be marketable.
Absolutely.
And I think they truly reflect certain tendencies within our society. Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Well, so where does that bring us with our it might be helpful to have another question that's coming out of our
may I just say
discussion.
something
Sure,
here?
we can have a dialogue.
If I might just add, because I think it goes right along with what you were saying, Peter Berger has a marvelous expression that he wrote this some time ago, and he calls it signals of transcendence. And he said, in human beings, there's that striving for order. So he gives examples, for example, of a mother comforting a child who wakes up in the night in a nightmare, and the mother takes the child and holds it and says, everything's going to be all right. And there's not just everything is all right in this particular moment, but that reflects something of an order outside of ourselves, a higher order, where a cosmic kind of order, that we all want order in our lives, and we want to know that everything is going to be okay. And so that if you push that to the ultimate, then it would be certainly a manifestation of God. And then he says also the children at play, or not just children at play, but even adults at play. But if you watch children at play, they lose all sense of time. Time is simply, it might be 11 a.m. or 10 a.m. or whatever, but time is meaningless. They're in almost a little eternity, quote unquote. And that in itself, just watching children at play, just totally absorbed and in their own time frame or lack of time frame. That's another point. And also, all of this, of course, the fact that we still hope, we have hope for the future. And that hope has to be deeper than ourselves. And in the face of tragedy such as we've seen this week, we have to have hope. The tragedy of the little girl in Burlington. And I'd like to mention something there in that regard. Yesterday at the funeral home, a young man came to the funeral home, and he didn't want to give his name. He said, "I don't know the family, but I just had to do something," and he brought some flowers. And he left the flowers with the family of these new immigrants to our country. They had just been here 2 months.
Yeah.
This is the child. Just wanted to identify the child. What's the child who drowned in the swimming pool?
Yes.
Here in Burlington.
Yes. And that act of compassion would be what Peter Berger would call a signal of transcendence. The very act of that man taking the time and the money and to go and buy some flowers and just leave them there anonymously, to me suggests that there is it's that yearning for the spiritual, for doing something, and the all-compassionate God, because I think it was Meister Eckhart who said something that if God does something, he breaks out with compassion. That's not an exact quote, but they're acts of compassion. And I found that was a very moving experience when I happened to be there.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that very much ties into what I was talking about, which is the sense of our actions being the reality of God, where we find God in the world, in each other. Your story reminded me of a story that I had read once of, it was a police officer who was trying to convince a young man from jumping off a cliff. You may have heard this story before. And the young man really wasn't being convinced not to jump, and as he went to leap, the police officer leapt and basically was dangling from the cliff, holding on to the arm of the young man and being pulled down over the cliff. And a passerby happened to see it and went and grabbed the police officer's legs and pulled them both up from the edge of the cliff. And afterwards, this police officer was being interviewed, and the reporter asked him, well, why did you do that? And he said that if he didn't do that, that there was no way that he could live with himself, knowing that he had not, done everything in his power in life to be supportive to this other person. And I've always found that to be such an incredibly beautiful story, both of the compassion that you're speaking of, and also the power, the strength, and courage that we can draw on internally to really manifest those higher qualities in life.
Something that interests me along this line, why I thought this might be a good topic, is I had talked with some people responsible, I thought, thoughtful people in religious circles, former religious circles, mentioned to them some of the comments that you've been sharing, and they said, "Oh, no, that's not anyone reaching out toward God. That's just pop stuff. That's just a fad. That's just something where the public has been manipulated. It's just an interest in something new, like you lower your hem line and you raise your hemline. You get a wider tie or a narrower tie, or you wear your hair a different style, or we go wild over Frank Sinatra, the Bobby Soxers, and we don't have Bobby Sox people anymore, but we have other kinds of people who go wild over other stars, and it's just a passing trend and phase. It doesn't mean anything. These were responsible, highly educated, supposedly devout people. Do you have any thoughts about why they would make a comment like that? They dismissed it all as inconsequential.
Well, I just can't agree with that. Perhaps I think the search is there. The quest is there. Whether they find it in organized religion or in a specific area such as Sufism or another kind of spirituality, I may not agree with that, but I have to respect it. And I think the searching is going on. That search for order and meaning and a coherence in something that would give us a foundation for what we are and what we do. I just can't agree with that. I don't know how else to. I mean, the fad. There could be a fad. Yes, there could be a certain cult or a certain fad of a given period that would attract people. But I think underneath that is the searching. We may not agree on their objective results. But at the same time, I respect the fact that I think they are searching. I think there's a yearning there. The very fact that fads come up suggests to me that there's a yearning that brings about, well, let's try something new. Let's try this.
We're sort of calling it forth in ourselves that way. I'm really struck by sort of what I'm hearing underlying that kind of statement is a separation, sort of a separation between the physical and the spiritual and the emotional, and that really, there's a wonderful quote, and I can't recall the person's name. It's, "We aren't human beings striving to be spiritual, we're spiritual beings striving to be human." and that a part of that struggle really is how do we manifest that spirituality in a way that flows between the separation so that we reach, I think, a place of wholeness and completeness within our own psyche and within the actions that we do in the world. I really respect that as their perspective as it being a fad. But in thinking about today, I thought a great deal about how is it different now than it was in the time of Buddha or in the time of Christ, or, how is it different now? And what I see is an incredible thread, which is that struggle to make the highest aspects of our being come through the struggle of the ego and the struggle of the pain and the suffering in life and the joys and the wonderful splendor in life, and from my perspective, a big piece of that is maintaining a strong inner connection, that through developing an intimate sort of internal relationship with whatever my concept of the divine is, I can bring that into the world. And I think what we're searching for and what we see so much in our society, the sort of external search that's going on, is really a deep cry for the internal search, which is knowing the self and knowing the divine internally, and then being able through that knowledge, through that knowing, to see that in all aspects of our lives.
Well, let me ask a difficult question here. You can pass if you wish.
Sure.
With this burgeoning interest in spirituality that I think we all agree is manifesting itself in society, why aren't our churches, synagogues, and temples burgeoning with people? Why is it that somehow or other people are not being drawn to organized religion in spite of their yearning for God? So do
That's
that however you will.
Yeah.
But I mean, you must raise that question. I remember when I was first ordained a priest, and it was in New York City, and it was in 1961, and the parish I was serving was in the heart there of Manhattan, and we had every seat taken on a Sunday in the church. If you wanted to sit with your spouse or a good friend, you'd have to get there at least 10 minutes before the hour. Every seat was taken. I mean, it was a wonderful feeling to worship with all these people. And others have said there were a lot of people who went to church in those days, in the very early 60s, and I guess maybe in the 50s. Why is that not our experience, in spite of the fact that people are, as we all, I think, agree, are yearning for God and showing that?
Well, my simple answer would be, as I see it, that then that the mainline churches are not responding to that need. Now, however one defines that, I mean, to me, God is found in the relativities of history. I mean, and from one age to another, there are going to be different needs. The cultures are changing. The culture is changing. We live in a very highly technological society. Our questions are different, and the churches have to. I mean, God is beyond the relativities of history, but it's in the relativities of history that God is found. And I think that's where the churches have to respond to the specific needs that arise with each new generation. And somehow or other, apparently, we're not responding, or the churches are not responding, or the synagogues are not responding as well as they might to the spiritual needs. And I think that's going to vary from one community to another. Even, let's say, within a state of Vermont. It's not, the needs of one little town are not going to be the same as people in Burlington, and the way it's going to be answered. So I'm not quite as cynical as the people that you mentioned in your previous statement. I think some churches are responding. I've seen churches where there's a tremendous sense of community, where there's magnificent liturgy. In fact, I'm traveling to Rutland just to go to the vigil, the Easter Vigil service at Christ the King Church in Rutland, where I know they're going to have a liturgy that's going to be magnificent.
How great.
I mean,
And
that's
others
going 68 miles,
out of
and
your
I know that they are responding very well in that particular parish to the needs of the people there, and it shows by the church attendance.
But you know, sister, the old pattern in my church and your church is that you're supposed to go to your parish church, geographically speaking. And even if you want to go to South Burlington and you live in Burlington, you're not supposed to do that. You know? And they're,
Perhaps I shouldn't have mentioned that publicly. I'm not. I don't have any fear about that.
No.
I just mentioned that as an example that I'm not quite that cynical, because I think there are churches that are responding. There are people within the church communities who are doing all kinds of things to bring people together, not just the clergy, but there are councils, parish councils in the Roman Catholic Church who are very active. They're giving, the lay people are giving a lot of their time, and they are doing a good job.
so changes are taking place.
So I wouldn't make a universal statement, although I guess if you look at the numbers, then perhaps those people were never Christian or never really in the first place. You know, but
How about you, Carol? What do you
I just
like
have to
say?
throw my 2 cents.
I would hope.
2 cents in here
Please.
and say, I'm sort of coming from a perspective that I think what you spoke of going to Rutland is the spirit in Rutland is what drew you there. I mean, the spirit of the parish, the spirit of the liturgy that'll be happening, and that's what draws, that when that true spirit comes through through people, whether it's the minister or the congregation, that energy that's created attracts people. And what I find in my own work is that a piece of it, what I see in people right now is there's a very deep sense of needing to be seen and recognized, sort of the divinity within the individual recognized and honored, and for there to be some sort of a personal connection, that is made, that is essential for community.
You want to say more about personal connection? That's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, by personal connection, I mean rather than, being in a room with 400 or 500 people and you maybe know 5 people, you're in a room and there may be 400 or 500 people there, but somehow in that context of the community, that individual is recognized and brought in somehow more fully into the community by feeling connected. I know there are that I've had the experience in my own journey of attending, large services in various organizations and never having anyone even come up to say hello. So I think that sense of, is it a piece Miriam talked about, is it the number that's important, or is it the quality of the experience that's happening that's important? And that if the spirit, if the core of the spirit is there and is being expressed in the community and through the ministry, that will draw more spirit to it. But if the concern, I think, becomes numbers and programs and getting lost in the externals, somehow that internal, that personal connection, that sort of true connection of love and compassion, which I think is what we're all looking for, is that kind of real human connection can get lost.
And I'd like to add, if I may,
Sure.
that we're in a culture that's getting more and more diverse.
Definitely.
And just take Vermont or Burlington with the influx of refugees and people from all different parts of Europe and Asia, and each of those people bring with them their own cultural, I don't want to say baggage, but their own cultural background, and the transcendental God is one and the same and remains one and the same. But the expression of people from different cultures in their experiencing of that God is going to be different. And I think, therefore, on behalf of churches, synagogues, and they have a big task to accommodate to all of these other special needs that are arising in our multicultural society, in our increasingly multicultural society. So I think the experience of God is going to be very different from one culture to another, but the transcendental God remains the same.
Absolutely.
But I think that there's a tremendous challenge, though, for the church, the mainline churches, synagogues, to meet in the needs of these people.
In deference to your mentioning, you're going down to Rutland, I want to biblically point out that many people went out to John the Baptist, and many people went out to Jesus.
Including Jesus went to John the
That's
Baptist.
right.
Don't forget that,
That's right.
Father Lee.
That's right. So there's a biblical tradition there.
Right. Yeah.
Well, it's time for people to join us here and to take an invisible chair with us. You don't have to just ask a question or make a statement. You can just sort of muse with us a little bit. And we did that last week, and I felt very happy by that. The gentleman who phoned in, we conversed back and forth on a number of exchanges, and I found that very helpful. And so I invite you today, those of you who are watching, you can see the number there on the screen to phone in and to join us. You also are, of course, welcome to make statements, ask questions.
I believe we may have a call.
Oh, we have a call?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Hello.
Hello.
You're welcome. You're on the air here with us. I'm glad you're joining us.
I have a question.
Okay.
Your program is very interesting, and we enjoy listening. Do you think that churches today are accommodating the secular in today's world rather than the spiritual?
Is there anyone you want to ask that of particularly, or should we just see who would like to try to answer that?
I'd like to hear what you all have to say, and I'll hang up and listen.
Well, you can stay on and listen and be part of us. I would like to.
Well,
start.
I might just say that I think it was Dietrich Bonhoeffer who said that all events are penultimate. In other words, every human event has an ultimate significance. And therefore, I don't think there would be that line drawn. I think Carol mentioned it. You mentioned it earlier. A strict line drawn, a dichotomy between the secular and the sacred.
Yeah.
Maybe our caller, I hope you're still online, you might make a little clearer what you mean by secular in the churches.
Well, it just seems many times that the churches go along much more with the secular than they do the spiritual. In other words, maybe that's the popular thing to do, to bring people into the church and so on and so forth. And that I don't understand.
I'm still struggling to understand.
I really don't understand.
What you mean by going along with the secular? Could you
just clarify?
Clarify your statement so we can respond.
I could, but I'm a little nervous talking on the phone.
You want some help?
And
You want some help? Can I help you?
I have to have some time to think about it myself, to put it in as a good question.
Well, let me make a suggestion. Maybe you're referring to the fact, for example, we have had the women's movement going on now for a number of years, and out of that, at least in the Episcopal Church, in part, we ended up ordaining women priests. Some people would bemoan that and say that's giving into the secular. Other people would say, no, that's not giving into the secular. That's glorifying God, because God created women as well as men, and women know a lot about things of the Spirit. In fact, most churches, I don't know about synagogues, but most churches have a majority of women in it. So it's a different interpretation. Is that something you're speaking of?
No, I wasn't referring to that. I was just... well, let me ask you another question.
Sure.
Do you think that organized religion in our mainline churches today turns people off? It does seem to. We've lost so many. In other words, what are the needs of people that you can think of? You say, what should churches do to respond to the needs of people? And we haven't heard very many examples so far.
I think I'd like to respond to that question. This is Carol. What I'm very much have a sense of is that there's a movement away from sort of a hierarchical approach to spirituality, where there may need to be sort of an intercession made by an individual for another individual, and more of a movement towards an individual experience of the divine, which very much, rather than placing an individual within the context of an organization that is hierarchical, it's placing an individual within the context of an organization that is more equal, and that within that context, each individual's gifts that are brought are recognized equally, and whatever that might be, whether that's, someone who's a wonderful artist or someone who might be a poet, that each of those gifts are recognized as a representation of the divine spirit within each person being represented. And I hear in your question, when you speak of secular versus spiritual, I hear in that question, where and how is the spirit being honored within the organizations that we have in our culture to support that? Is that along the line of what you were trying to express?
I don't really think it is what I had in mind, but I do thank you very much, and I'll try to think up another question another time.
Okay, well, thank you for
Thank you very
in.
much for calling.
Thank you very much. Well, we will talk here.
I'm wondering if the lady might have been thinking of sort of faith is over here and action in terms of justice actions as another, two separate things. I don't know if that's a question she was aiming at. I think there's a movement, certainly consciousness, that faith has to be integrated into action, and that they're not mutually exclusive. I don't, perhaps that was not in what she was
she had some
thinking.
strong feelings, but we weren't picking up what they were. I wondered whether the issue was that some of our church leaders or synagogue leaders are trying to duplicate the religious body that they knew in the past when they were growing up, and that it just doesn't fit the present circumstances. And so people get somewhat bored and disinterested because they don't feel a resonance between their spiritual leader and their own life.
One example that I might give is a church on Long Island that I happen to be familiar with, where they've had a tremendous influx of Hispanics. And most of the people there were either Italian or Irish. This happens to be a Roman Catholic church. And what they've done there is just absolutely remarkable. And it goes along with your sense, you're mentioning before, of the sense of community. And they've broken down the when I say broken down, I don't mean that in a negative way, but they've taken the parish, and the people are put into they're in different small groups. And if those groups meet, in addition to their church service on Sunday, the masses, some of which are in Spanish, some are in English, some have a combination of both Spanish and English hymns and readings. They meet in homes, and they have little Bible studies. They also are support groups. So if one family is having financial difficulty, is having, whatever kind of problems that human beings have, a death in the family, the others are there. And it's created a tremendous sense of community within the, and then the whole parish they're not now little separate groups that are separated and alienated from the others, but it's been a way of bringing that whole parish together and recognizing the needs of the Hispanics coming in and answering to their spirituality too, responding to their particular cultural milieu in the way that they have traditionally exercised or experienced their spiritual growth.
There was a poll taken a few years ago now from Notre Dame University about the ethnic background of people in the Roman Catholic Church in this country, and it was fascinating. The majority of the Roman Catholic congregants, members of parishes, are Hispanic. And most of us, at least from my generation, would think, oh, they're Irish, I'm sure, or living around here, well, they're probably French, you know. But no, they're Hispanic. And it sort of breaks down your stereotypes. And you really wonder how the church is going to be different in this country as a result of so many Hispanics. Well, just again, reflecting on the question that was asked, although I'm an Episcopalian and I'm quite happy in my church, yet there's sometimes where I feel that I would like some of the informality and spontaneity I find in a Black Baptist worship service. I really miss that. I also miss some of the spontaneity I find in some charismatic services. I know some people who are Episcopalians who sing in tongues. They're afraid to sing in tongues in their own church on a Sunday morning because people around them might wonder what's going on. I mean, there's a certain stiffness, rigidity, at least in our church, that I can imagine would turn some people, turn them off.
And at the same time, some people, and I'll include myself, long for the days of having a marvelous organ rather than the guitar.
Right, that's absolutely true.
So, I mean, it can work both ways.
That's right. That's right.
And I think the Episcopal Church has preserved, the High Anglican churches have preserved some of the great classics of church music.
Yep.
So, you know, that's what I'm saying. We have such a diversity culturally, and the different age groups, you know, have different yearnings for different kinds of expressions of spirituality. So I think it's a pretty tough challenge to meet for the mainline churches.
We're still looking. I want to hear from you, Carol, but I also would like to hear from you people out there who are watching this program and listening to it. You may have some thoughts, some questions. You may want to come and sit down and share with us around this table, and you're welcome to do that. Just call the number that's on the screen, and we'll be delighted to share with you. And it stimulates us. It stimulates our thinking, and it helps to make us more honest. You know, we don't want to just draw conclusions because there are conclusions. We want to factor in what other people have to say. Carol?
Yeah, I very much appreciate what you're both saying, and one thing I've found in my own experience is within the Sufi tradition that it's really a tradition that focuses on the experience of God. So that the sense of of God being both transient and immanent at the same time. And so in terms of the kinds of gatherings that might happen, some of the traditional gatherings are what's known as a zikr, which the purpose of that is the remembrance of God. And sort of a central practice within that is a practice, La ilaha illallahu, which is there is no God but God. And so it's working with music and sound to really have that kind of experience, that there is nothing but God, and that we are a part of God, God is here and God is outside equally. And that in looking at the structures, I struggled a bit with responding to sort of the secular issue in the question, because I don't see there to be a difference between that our organizations or our communities that come together, they're coming together because there's this deep longing for a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, a sense of feeling supported, a sense of being interconnected, related to each other with a common goal, and in our particular context, in the goal of coming to know God, coming to know the divine in whatever aspect that might be. So it's a little different orientation, I think, in that it's really, at least for me in my own experience, it's really about knowing God. I mean, knowing God in whatever way that I may be able to know God, and how that manifests through me, and also in this sort of remembrance, the constantly remembering, because I think our natural state, just like the separation between the mind, the body, the spirit, and the ego and the higher aspects of our being, is we tend to get pulled, sort of the gravitational pull of the ego, I'll call it, towards separation, when the longing is towards union.
Yeah, I wrote it that way in the title for today's discussion because I wanted to make clear that I didn't want to talk about the search for God within religious groups. I wanted to talk about the search for God outside of those religious groups, basically. The so-called heathen.
But I do, but I do think that we need to work more ecumenically to see how others do experience God.
Oh yes, definitely.
And I mean those within, well, Sufism or, well, Thomas Merton at his death was certainly getting very deeply involved with the religions of the East and exploring their spirituality. So I think there's a great need for that. And we can learn from one another.
Absolutely. Well, Native Americans have a lot to offer us
Yes.
in terms of their knowledge of God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing that really strikes me too, within the Christian tradition, there's such a wealth of practice and experience that focuses on that, sort of the experience of the divine. I think you mentioned earlier the popularity of the Gregorian chants, I think has a great deal to do with the emotions that are invoked in people by just the incredible beauty and the sound of the music. And that's when I speak of the experience, I'm referring it in part to that experience of moving beyond our sort of everyday consciousness into that consciousness, sense of connection and interrelatedness with each other.
We have time for another call. If someone would like to give us a ring. You don't need to be afraid because you're on television. You don't have to give your name or address, phone number at all. Just someone who would like to share with us what you are thinking. please give us a ring.
I had actually brought some poetry along that I'd like to share, if this is an appropriate moment to do
Sure.
that. And it speaks to what we've been talking about. That's why I brought it. This particular piece is by Rumi, who is a wonderful Persian poet, a scholar, and also a mystic. If 10 lamps are present in one place, each differs in form from another, yet you can't distinguish whose radiance is whose when you focus on the light. In the field of spirit, there is no division. No individuals exist. Sweet is the oneness of the friend with his friends. Catch hold of spirit. Help this headstrong self disintegrate, that beneath it you may discover unity, like a buried treasure.
That's beautiful.
I opened this up and it sort of fell open to that page, and I really felt like I should bring it.
Who wrote it?
Jalaluddin Rumi. And this is from a collection called Daylight, which was translated by Kabir Helminski.
This is from Sufi writings?
Yes.
And it's fortunate that more of those writings are from the Persian or the Arabic are being translated into English.
Yeah. But it really, in the speaking of the unity, it really speaks to where I think our conversation has been moving today, which is the union, the loss of separation between the secular and the daily life.
Let me throw out for consideration. We're still open, though, to be interrupted by your thoughts, but throw out for discussion at least the Christian theological concept that God's in search of us, and that our looking for God is really, on a very, very deep level, our response to God looking for us. And it's that God initiates it always, and we respond as we are able to see. And it sort of puts it very, very differently than sometimes is considered.
I think I would add to that, Lee, with saying that God knows Him, herself, through our own experience in life. That somehow in our creative process and in the free will that we exhibit in life and the choices we make, that there are aspects of the creation that the Creator is able to experience more fully through each of our individual experiences. Which is a little, it's in line with that, and maybe adds to it as well.
Yeah. Once, some time ago, we had a sort of a large, when I was in the Diocese of New York, we had a large symposium about whether the Godhead feels and whether there's something more than just the stillness within the Godhead, whether that God longs for us to be in communion with Him. And some people found it scandalous that God would be longing for us, for a relationship with us, that they wanted God not to have any feelings at all, you know? I don't know, have you heard this kind of conversation?
Yeah. I think you're speaking of longing. It reminds me of what is found so beautifully in many of the Christian mystics is the image of the divine as the lover and the beloved.
Yes.
And that's very much true also of any mystical tradition, the Sufi tradition. That internal longing, the call of the lover becomes so strong for the beloved to come. Really is I think at the very heart of much of the spiritual search is that knowing.
Sometimes we human beings feel so poorly about ourselves, we just can't really believe God would long for me or for you or for you. We somehow can't imagine God. We look up at the stars. We look at the comet that's whizzing through space at this moment, and to think that the creator of all of that longs for us individually, that's kind of, on one level, it's kind of hard to believe. You know.
Well, I think that's where the idea of God is it's a relationship. I think people, I mean, all human beings are relational. And we can only relate as persons, and God as a person. And I think that might be something along Rudolf Otto's idea of the holy. Probably don't have time to get into here, but that in that act of any act of justice or compassion or of striving for order, there's a reflection of the transcendence of God. And it's only because we're persons or human persons relating to it. And I forget the author, but somebody gave the analogy of a relationship with one another. And gave it, the analogy was based, I guess, on the relationship between a husband and wife, and that would be analogous to the relationship of persons, that can be a reflection of the ultimate relationship that God, we as the highest creatures that God has made, should reflect in our lives. It's not very well said, but
Hosea is all about that.
But there's a whole new dimension outside of ourselves that comes from our personal relationships.
We should wind up at this point. You have further things you want to?
Well, I'd just like to mention, there's a story about a priest working in the slums of a city. Somebody went up to him and said, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "So that the rumor of God may not disappear completely." And I think that just sums up for me that it's in every action. It doesn't have to be particularly a sacred action. It could be just feeding somebody at a soup kitchen, as this priest was doing. That's a reflection, that's one of the signals of transcendence that point ultimately to a transcendent God. So I will conclude on that
That's
point.
beautiful.
That's very, very helpful. How about you?
Well, that was such a lovely closure. I think in closing, I'd just like to speak to how, in my own life, important it is to sort of bring the sacred into daily life and to honor that. So I would like to offer sort of as a new definition of holiness that all things are holy, that all aspects of our lives are holy, and that holding that awareness of that in the experience of the moment is really what, in my own experience, has brought forth sort of a different perspective on viewing all of the experiences in life. And that awareness, I think, feeds to the rumor of, continuing the rumor of God.
I guess we're off the air. I thought we had. I thought she had come in once before. I mean, that was the only. Well, Carol, thank you for your input very much. It was very helpful.
Pleasure being here.
And Sister Miriam, thank you for what you had to say.
Thank you.
I have some things to consider now as I go away from our studio time today. Please tune in again. We're delighted to have you share an hour with us. Next week, we're going to talk about can you have a serious spiritual life without an institutional connection with a church or a synagogue. So that should be an interesting topic. So the very best to you. Have a good week, and we look forward to having you here next week.